Hey guys, happy Sunday to everybody. All right, so by chance, my mother turned the television on and I realized that the People's National Party had their conference at the arena, I think it is, or the stadium, but in that vicinity, the arena. And wow, what a speech. I didn't get to hear the other members of the opposition. I only got to hear most of basically all of the present leader for the PNP speaking, Mark Golding, aka Marky G. Brilliant speech. Brilliant speech is one of the best I've heard you. I know it is not easy to communicate in a manner that you probably perhaps are not really used to in terms of using the Jamaican vernacular, what we call our patois, succinctly, easily, sweetly, because I guess that's not just your forte, and that's fine. Not because we're all Jamaicans mean that we're going to grasp, our Creole well. And that's fine. It doesn't mean that you're bad or good. It's just us. If it's not you, it's just not you. But it wasn't bad for me today. And certainly your sentiments, it felt real. One of the strengths with politicians, which I'm afraid of, is that they know how to sell salt to slugs. They know how to sell sand to Arabs. So sometimes I become very wary, but I don't use it to daunt me or to deter me from believing, knowing when change for the better will come. And oftentimes when I'd prefer to use the word transformation, because when I use the word change can also be indicative of reverting to the old way, or change can mean you get worse. You're changing, but you're becoming worse. So it's not necessarily for the positive, but transformation. I have not heard transformation used in a negative context, because transformation means you become somebody completely different, total, and usually on the opposite end. So, transformation is in and of itself something good. What I want to give to you today, Mark Golding, is you said some fundamental points that I want to touch on. And I'm not sure I've ever heard any other politicians speak that way. And maybe it is because you have been exposed to it based on your family background. You yourself have uttered that you really don't even need to be paid by politics because you're okay financially, more than okay financially. People consider you a wealthy person, a rich man, however you want to dub yourself, based on the generation that, you would have been from, your parents, grandparents, and so on. So that wealth would have passed down to you. Maybe that business mind, that business head would have passed down to you, and you're able to maintain, sustain, and even increase, the wealth that you were given by your family, and be a good steward of same. You mentioned, that blue collar workers can now become millionaires based on investments, based on being properly paid should the PNP come in power. And that was something good to hear. Not just getting a basic or a fair salary. Let me use the word fair as opposed to basic. I thought that was very good. Finally, I said to myself, somebody is looking to pull people just from the basic foundation of being able to provide food, shelter, clothing, and a little entertainment, that you would want people to become millionaires. Now, I know some people have it that some people are millionaires because based on how they close out their money at the end of the year. But you're talking in terms of, being more than just the average person who earns. Somebody who can more than afford to buy a decent car and a decent home. If they need to take a vacation at what you would call 4-star, 5-star hotel, they can do so. Not necessarily invariably, but at least sometimes, moderately. They can travel to different parts of the world moderately at the very least. They can help other families. They can help people along the wayside, and it doesn't hurt their pocket or pockets financially. So I know that is what you mean. So somebody who is more than well off, rich, perhaps, maybe not necessarily in terms of wealthy, because we're venturing onto different, but at least if you get to that millionaire status and you carry them there, then they can, with the right ingredients, with the right ideas, move further into the wealthy status. I really appreciated that point. I also appreciated the point where you talk about early childhood education. You mention a term that I use very often called critical thinking skills. In schools, they used to have a thing called mental ability, which is the very same thing. Emotional intelligence, self-control, they're all composites of that hypothesis called critical thinking skills. I'm actually reading a book on it right now. It's a 3-in-1 book. I don't even remember the name of the author. I would encourage people to get it. Basically just look for good reviews on critical thinking skills books and read it, and you will understand that a lot of the things you could have prevented had you have possessed critical thinking skills. You'd have prevented it. I would encourage people to read a book called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ. That is Intelligence Quotient by Daniel Goleman. That's a very good one. And there's another one named Brain Power. You have to really, your brain has to really, you have to be good at critical thinking to read that book. It's good. It opens your brain. It trains you. It's like a training of the brain. The brain waves, the different cells in the brain. It trains it, to be honest with you. I appreciated that. I appreciate the fact that you mentioned from Wapikil Phillip, from Johnny Was a Boy, the income tax threshold was $1.5 million. Remember when Audley Shaw was the Minister of Finance, and I know they had increased it to 1.5 million. That was some time ago, and you quoted a figure that I quoted to somebody, at least $3 million. That's a fair amount based on how inflation is, based on how the dollar is. I appreciate that very much. $3 million is a fair amount. Remember, for every $1, I need almost 160 Jamaican dollars. $3 million is still chicken feed. So $3 million was a fair and balanced amount that you quoted. I respected that very much. One of the reasons I think a lot of Jamaicans will feel a little bit more comfortable where you are concerned is that you're one of the few, not the only one, but one of the few that your name really can't be called in corruption, because the fact is that you're coming from wealth, unless you're a greedy man, unless you're avaricious and can't be satisfied. I don't get that feeling. Then we would be in problems should the baton be handed over to you and you become the next your party becomes the next government. I really appreciated those three. Yes, so I really appreciated those three fundamental points. Getting blue collar workers to be millionaires in the way, that is very good and helpful to them. The early childhood education, especially introducing critical thinking skills from early days, moving them from duns to bright, basically. And what was the other? And moving the income tax threshold to $3 million. That's a fair amount. I said to myself, I was saying $3 million in my mind. And when I heard you say that, I said kudos to you for that. I also appreciated the fact that you're aware that most Jamaicans are not doing well financially. I'm glad you mentioned about the recidivism, 40% and probably more. In other words, people going back into the prison system, they're getting worse. Crime and violence is at an all high. It is serious. It means that there's no transformation. If almost 50% years ago, I remember reading both the Observer and the Gleaner back to back. One came out one day, the following day, the other one, that 40% and counting people have some mental challenge years ago. So I can just imagine now it's probably 60, 70, 80% to how some people behave. Aggression is at an all high. You said let us deal with things amicably instead of cursing people out. You talk about empresses and you introduce your wife, which is good. So brilliant speech. I just hope you mean every word you say, sir. Guys, follow me on TikTok, subscribe to my YouTube channel, share this message.